Okay, how is that? Can you hear me now? Okay, so I just unplugged my fancy microphone. Okay. Okay, can you hear me now? Okay. I'm not hearing that no one can hear me. So I'll just dive right in. Thank you very, very much, Rachel, for inviting me to be part of this talk tonight. And good, you can hear me. That's wonderful. And to talk specifically about community media, it's a topic which I can talk about for hours and hours and hours on end. And I'd like to explain, first of all, where the title for this presentation came from, which is My Voice Counts. And community radio has been around, for quite a few years now. Most community radio stations, not just here in Canada, but also in the world, started in the 1980s. And there was an organization that was started, which is the Worldwide Association of Community Radios, which goes by the French acronym AMARC. And I was talking to someone who was visiting a community radio station in Haiti. And like many community radio stations, it was a fairly small and ramshackle building, because community radio stations usually don't have an awful lot of money, so you put together what you can. And someone who I was talking to said that they were down in Haiti, and a couple of women were coming out of the radio station, and there was one woman who was in her 80s. And she stopped and she said to the person on the street, she says, "I am now a someone. I have been on the radio. My voice counts." And that, for me, is what sums up community radio and community media, and why it's so important, is because community media empowers people to speak their own stories, to speak their own truths, and to basically get the word out there that you don't have to have a lot of money to be able to make your voice count. It's like the airwaves are open to you, the internet is open to you if you have a community media organization. And that's why I think community media is really important, and why I've been involved with it for many, many years. I started my broadcasting career as a student at University of Windsor, and it was back in the 1970s. And back at that time, there were only 2 or 3 non-profit stations on the air in Canada. And one of them was Queen's University, and it kind of beat everybody else to the punch, because it's actually one of the oldest stations in Canada. It actually went on the air in 1922, and it is still on. But most other campus radio stations didn't come on the air until at least the 70s, and even then there were only maybe a handful. CKCU in Ottawa was one of the first ones. It's a station which I have volunteered at. CKMS in Waterloo is another one, which is still on the air. And also CFMU at McMaster University, which is the station that I was the manager for 5 years. But back in the 1970s, I was at the University of Windsor, and the station was a closed circuit station, which meant if people could theoretically, in the residence, turn on their radio and plug it in through the electrical outlet, and they would be able to hear the radio station. Now, realistically, that never really happened, because we didn't have much of an advertising budget. We're also in a major market that had radio stations not just from Windsor, and CKLW, the Big 8, dominated the landscape or the soundscape for many, many years, but we also had a whole bunch of radio stations in Detroit. So realistically, I went into the radio station, and once I got there, I just thought, this is what I want to do with my life. It was really, really exciting, because I'd been in theater before, I played music, and I knew that I wanted something which was in arts, but I really didn't know just what, just where I wanted to be. But once I went to the radio station at University of Windsor, I thought, not only is this space good for playing other people's music off records and everything, or doing news and that kind of thing, but it's a perfect art space. And this is where I think that the tie-in between what SPARC does and what community media does is really is really strong. And that's because community media, television and radio and internet can also be a powerful space for local artists to get out their works. And I'll come back to talking about that in a while. But so while I was sitting there doing my folk show at 9 o'clock in the morning, I don't think I think I had a listening audience of one, and that was the person who cleaned the student center first thing in the morning. And she would always come in and she'd say, "I love listening to your show." I don't think it even really bothered me that she might have been my only listener. But anyway, I caught the radio bug, and very shortly after that, I did a interview with the local executive producer of the CBC station in Windsor, and he said to me, "You're a really good interviewer. Do you want to start doing a feature every Saturday morning on CBC?" And I went, "Wow, that's a pretty cool idea." So I did a feature every Saturday, an interview with a local morning show host about what was going on at the university. And then I said to them, "Well, are there any summer jobs around here?" And they said, "Do you want to be a summer tech?" And I, well, what's a tech? What do they do? And they said, "Oh, that's okay. We'll train you." That was back in the days when there were jobs at CBC. So I began working at CBC, but I never really forgot what I had learned in campus radio. Then I went out to Vancouver, and the reason why I went out to Vancouver was because there was an arts producer whose work I really admired, and I really wanted to work with this man in the worst way. His name was Robert Chesterman, and he did radio drama. He also did documentary programs, and even though I was in Windsor and I had heard him only by name, I really have to work with this man. So I packed my bags and I got on the train, went out to Vancouver, and I went to the CBC and said, "Hi, I'm here to work with Robert Chesterman. I want a job." So I actually did get a job eventually working with Robert Chesterman, which was one of the best experiences of my life. And unfortunately, he has passed away. But I just thought, wow, what a gift that was. I also worked with some really amazing people. Don Mowat, who was a radio producer of exceptional ability, who now is no longer at the CBC. He's also he's working at UBC, I believe, in the journalism department. One of the funniest things about CBC Vancouver was there was a show which is starting right about that time, and I was both a technician and also a production assistant, and so my desk was right out in the middle of sort of a big open area. So there are these two comedians who were starting a new show called Double Exposure. Some of you may remember it from back in the 80s. They were on the air for about 10 years or so. So they would come in and they would sort of sit down on the couch across from my desk, and I would sort of pontificate about the state of the world and things like that and share opinions with them. And this one day they said to me, do you want to be a celebrity? And I said, "No, I think I'd rather be a cult figure." So anyway, I never thought anything more of it. The show went on the air, and I listened to it the first week, and I heard a voice which was kind of familiar, but I went, "Nah, can't be." The next week, somebody came up to me and said, "Do you know you're a character on Double Exposure?" And I went, I don't know why they do that. No, it can't be me. And they said, "Well, yes, it is. She's called Victoria Penner, small but vital reporter." So I still do not know to this day just why they chose me as a character, although Bob Robertson told me, he said, "Well, Victoria, don't you know?" And I said, "No." And he says, "Well, everybody else does." So anyway, that's just kind of a diversion, but I've had a really wonderful career in 14 years at CBC in both radio and TV. It was quite a while ago now, but I never did forget why I loved community media. And while I was waiting for that job to materialize at CBC Vancouver, then I saw this poster for this place called Vancouver Co-op Radio. And so I thought, well, maybe I should go down and check that out. And so I went to Vancouver Co-op Radio, and what I discovered was this was a radio station like no other station that I'd seen before. It was set up specifically so that people who lived in the downtown east side can dialogue about the social conditions which existed in the downtown east side. And for those of you who are familiar with the area, it's gotten, I would say, even worse than it was back in the 1980s. It's one of the poorest areas in Canada, and this is where the radio station was located, and they actually did programming which was based on that place. So I got involved in arts programming there specifically because I went in and I said, is there a show you want me to produce? And so Peter Grant, who was a wonderful man, dear friend, then he said, well, we just got this Canada Council grant for this sound art program. So do you want to do that? I said, well, what's sound art? And he said, well, why don't you just dive in and see what you make of it? So I did, and that was one of the very first audio art programs on the radio in Canada. And it's audio art and sound art is something which I've continued to do over the years, and that's where the beginnings of that were. So that's where I started, and that's when I realized at Co-op Radio that media could be something more than, as they describe it, singing and selling. It can be a tool for community involvement, community engagement, and where people who have something to say can come in and do a show. Now, since that time, I've worked at many community radio stations, and I've been a volunteer and also contract staff as a consultant and helping organizations try to set up radio stations and also to maximize the effect of and impact of the radio station that they already have. So that's one thing I've been doing. Most recently, I've also ventured into community television. I'm working with an organization called Cactus, which stands for the Canadian Association of Community Television Stations and Users. And it's an organization that is a support to, there are approximately 10 standalone over-the-air stations in Canada. And so there's the Rogers and Eastlink model where it's basically there's a community station, but it's run very much by, the corporate entities of Rogers and, the other big telecoms. But what we promote in Cactus is that ordinary people should be able to set up and have a transmitter and broadcast over the air. Now, since that, in the last 15 years, the internet has become a lot more important and popular, and it's also a really viable way of getting information out there. So that's one of the models that we work with Cactus as well, is you don't have to have an over-the-air radio or TV signal. You can also have an internet signal. And there's some interesting models with that. There's a radio station in Huntsville called Hunters Bay Radio, and they were telling me that they started out as an internet radio station, and then their local listeners started saying, well, yeah, but we don't want to just receive you on the internet, because in rural areas, as those of you who live in rural areas probably know, then it's like bandwidth is a fairly scarce commodity, and sometimes you can't always pull in a signal, and it's expensive and everything like that. So they said, can you put up an on-air signal? So they did. They have a radio station now which I can pick up from, about an hour and a half drive from, I live in Barrie, Ontario, and my mother lives in South River, which is about a 2-hour drive. So I can pick up Hunters Bay Radio now for about an hour of my drive, and that's a pretty impressive signal. So that's an example of starting with an internet signal and then being able to and transition to an over-the-air signal. So could somebody just give me a time check here in the comments here? I can't see my own clock on my cell phone, so I don't really know how I'm doing for time. So if that doesn't work, I'll just go get my partner's cell phone. So anyway, when we talk about community media, when I talk about it, the community media can mean a lot of things in a lot of different senses. Okay, so 16 minutes in. Okay, that's good. It's 7:15. Thanks. So if you can keep giving me time checks every 15 minutes, that would be really good. Okay, so community media, in the sense of the organizations that I'm involved with, means a nonprofit organization set up by members of the community with the board of directors, and that people can then join. And so it's kind of different in, you know, all media says that they're community media, but what community media means in this area, in this sense, is that you have a nonprofit organization. So I should mention too that another thing that I do right now is I'm the program manager for a new fund which was set up by Canadian Heritage called the Local Journalism Initiative, where their journalists money is given to an administrative organization to distribute money to media organizations across the country. So I'm the program officer with Cactus, and we've placed 14 video journalists across the country. So that's one, and one thing that we insisted on in our model is in order to apply, you had to have a nonprofit organization. So it's like, you know, the private sector has an awful lot of money, and the message and the signal and everything and what's on the air is controlled pretty tightly from head office. And we thought, no, you got your thing set up or so. We need something which empowers ordinary citizens. So one of the things that I've done, because we do have some money still left to place journalists in underserved communities, I have been working with a community group to help them set up their organization so that they can apply for a journalist. And to set up your own nonprofit organization, many of you have probably done it already. It's a fairly simple thing, and applying to the province, and then, you know, getting your membership structures and bylaws and everything. So your first thing, if you want to start a nonprofit media arts organization, is to do that. And there are lots of templates and boilerplates out there to, you know, that you can use as a basis to set up your organization. So you don't need to feel like you're on your own. In addition to Cactus that I work for, there's also the National Campus and Community Radio Association, and also if you happen to be in a francophone community, there is l'Arc du Canada, which is Association Radio Communautaire du Canada, and that there is about maybe 20. Anyway, I don't know the exact numbers, but I know there aren't a lot. But there are community radio stations that are francophone stations in Ontario. There's one close to me in Penetanguishene. There's one in Gravelbourg, Saskatchewan. Anyway, I don't know all of the locations right now. There are also quite a few community radio stations, I believe 24 to 30 in Quebec as well. So if you want information about setting up community radio, you could go to the NCRA or LARC. And if you have interest in setting up a community TV station or a community media center, then you can give me a call at Cactus. And with Cactus, we specifically are looking at a multimedia model where, for our local journalism initiative, for example, we're looking at, you don't have to have an over-the-air transmitter. You can also have an internet portal. There's one location that we have in Ashcroft, BC, which is a really interesting model because they are internet only, and they're run by an organization called the Ashcroft Hub. And the Ashcroft Hub is a community center with a whole bunch of things. They do dance lessons, they do cooking classes, and they have a media center. So the media center has applied for to get a journalist, and they have a journalist, and they're doing shows for their community. We also have a tiny location up in Scriber, Ontario, which is only 800 people. And the librarian up there, Donna Mikulak, has a background in media, and she's a librarian up there. And she thought, well, libraries are also setting up media centers across Canada and basically throughout North America. That's one of the trends in libraries right now, is for the library to be a center which doesn't just do books. They do a whole bunch of different things. And so media centers, is one in Grand Rapids, Michigan, which is very impressive. A little closer to me in Barrie, the Innisfil Community Library has a media center in their facility, and it is outstanding. They have a music center, they have editing, they have computers for editing, they have video production facilities, a green screen. The thing is that libraries don't always have the resources to be able to teach actually how to do video and media production. So that's where organizations like Cactus can come in, because we have the people who have the expertise to be able to teach how to do media. And there are lots of really interesting models too. Ashcroft, for example, that I was talking about a minute ago, they do all of their video production using 4 or 5 iPhones. It's really remarkable how they do it, because they have iPhones that they scatter around the room for different camera angles, and then they have an iPad that has a switcher program, so they can go, okay, I want camera left, I want a profile shot of this person, okay, take it, okay, get ready with, and so you can do a whole variety of shots, which makes it really interesting. What's really great right now is when I started working in community media, there was no equipment. It was really, really expensive to get set up. And I remember my first audio recorder was a Sony TC110, which is a brick of a cassette machine, and an external microphone. And it's like I'd have to haul this thing around. And it's like, to buy even a broadcast quality cassette machine back then was $1,000 for the cassette machine and microphone. Now you can get small recorders for, you can record with your phone. That's the way you're hearing me right now, and I don't have an external microphone. So the quality is pretty good. I have several dedicated recorders that only cost between $200 and $300. You can even get them for cheaper than that. And the sound quality is better than the TC110 was that I had in the 1970s. So the tools are out there. And it's really remarkable these days just how low the barrier for entry is to start doing really, really good looking and good sounding media productions with some fairly inexpensive tools. The other thing, cactusmedia.ca, one of the other areas that our executive director is venturing into right now, which is really, really forward thinking. She is working on doing engagement with communities through augmented and virtual reality. And so she just got her master's from Emerson College in Boston about civic engagement through media, and specifically doing VR and AR is something that she's really excited about. And I think that we're only now just starting to explore what those mediums can do. So it's sort of like, I think now if we not look at media in segments, like I'm doing radio and I'm doing video and I'm doing print and I'm doing photography and I'm doing websites, it's like we're doing all of them these days. And I think that there's a lot of potential for communities to have really, really engaging programming involving their volunteers and their citizens who are basically doing productions for each other. I just helped set up an organization here in Barrie, Ontario, where we're looking at setting up a community media portal with podcasts on it and with stories. And so there's a lot of interesting models out there. So the other organization that I want to mention as well, if you are thinking that you want to get a community radio station on the air, I'm also on the board of the Community Radio Fund of Canada, which was set up 10 years ago. We finally convinced the CRTC that commercial radio stations should take some of their profits and give them to nonprofit radio. And the commercial radio stations didn't necessarily agree with us, but the CRTC did. And so anyway, so we now do have the Community Radio Fund of Canada, and the commercial radio stations are on board. We're getting contributions from them every year, for which we thank them from the bottom of our hearts. So right now it's like, because there's a limited pot of money, then you have to be an over-the-air licensed station in order to be able to get funding. But anyway, we're looking at expanding the model as we find more sources of funding and that kind of thing. So the Community Radio Fund of Canada is also a place to be aware of. And that some of you may be listening already who have a community radio station. One thing that's really interesting about community radio right now is, in the very early days, most of the growth of community stations were what was called a campus-based community radio station. So it would be based at the university, but the mandate would be to serve the community as well. And originally the NCRA for a long time had many more campus and community station radio members than they have now. And it's like there are stations starting in, in Picton, in Port Hope, in Halliburton, in Huntsville, just north of me, and BC, there are little stations starting up. My own personal list of community radio stations there's 104, and that's English only. So there are 180 over-the-air stations across the country, approximately, French and English. That doesn't include Indigenous stations, and the reason why they're not in that bunch is because the funding model is different. So the CRTC kind of divides this up a little bit differently. So the National Campus and Community Radio Association and LARC and the CFRC do not right now fund Indigenous radio stations, but I think that that's something that we definitely like to do in the future. So right now, okay, I guess I will ask right now if there are any questions, and I'll just take just a teeny bit of a break before what I'm going to dive into next is if you want an over-the-air station, how licensing works and how to do that. So anyway, I will pause for just a couple of minutes here. Thank you to Rachel for putting up all of the URLs in the chat so that you can see where all of these places that I'm referring to are. So, seeing no questions there, may I have a time check, please? And I will dive into the next part. Okay, so if you want to have your own community over-the-air television or radio station, not impossible. Okay, and question, how has the rise of podcast affected radio? Okay, that is a very, very good question. So I'll get into that right now before I talk about how to get an over-the-air licensed station. Podcasts, I don't think podcasts have affected radio negatively at all. There are many, many opinions on that. As a community radio person, when podcasts came along, I'd almost thought that I would have to leave radio because the cutbacks in CBC were so severe and getting worse. And it was, it's community and campus radio. It didn't look like it was growing. This was back in, I would say, 2005, 2006. So very, very early on. I was invited by Wayne McPhail, who is a podcast visionary, and who I met through Rabble.ca, which is an organization I still work with as their podcast producer. I wear several hats. Anyway, Wayne had approached Rabble and said, there's this new thing called podcasting, and I think we should get into it at Rabble and start a podcast network. And of course, everybody said, what's a podcast? Back in 2005, there was no iTunes. There was only like a very small handful of people who were starting to do podcasts in 2005. And I tell you, for years and years and years, until about 2013, when I told people I do podcasts, then I would get a blank stare and they would say, what's a podcast? And then they would sometimes respond, but I don't have an iPod. So it's sort of like, it felt like I was podcasting in the wilderness for a long time. But I did see that there was a potential there to extend the work that I was doing on air, because it's like I was no longer bound by a transmitter and a certain part of the day. So it's like my programs have a longer shelf life. So I started working in podcasting and also staying involved in my local community radio station, which I was back in Hamilton at the time, so that was CFMU. So I think that podcasting has done nothing but good for radio. And I don't see, when I talk to people, it's like I know people who listen to both radio and also listen to podcasts. There are people in radio who believe that podcast is a threat to radio, and it's an either or thing. People either listen to radio or they listen to podcasts. And it's sort of like, it might be true, I think, eventually, that over-the-air radio might decline. And right now, it's still doing okay. And the reason why radio is still doing okay over the air is because internet is not used in a widespread way in cars yet. Also, bandwidth in Canada, it's like, you know what it's like. You know, if you listen or watch a lot of things on your phone, then your data plan gets eaten up really, really fast. So it's okay if you're on Wi-Fi, but if you're, you know, out wandering around or in a car or something like that, it gets very expensive to do all of your listening, you know, live off your data plan. But I think that there are ways that radio and podcasts can coexist. And that's the thing that I've always tried to do with my podcasts is like now what I do is I distribute podcasts to radio stations as well. And it's like there's an extra shelf life. So I think it just kind of increases the number of ways that people can listen to audio content. And I also think, too, it's like what podcasts have done is there are a lot of people who are listening to podcasts now who would never, ever who haven't listened to radio beyond turning on the radio and hearing music. Now they're hearing drama. Now they're hearing poetry shows. Now they're hearing documentaries and things like that. And so I think it's really, really opened up our ears to the possibilities of what kinds of things that you can listen to. So I think I think podcasting has been very good for radio. I think the day will come when radio terrestrial transmitters picked up on the FM band and also terrestrial television as well will be supplanted by the by internet. But right now we're not at that point. And I think that people in rural areas in particular, there's some very good reasons for still having an over-the-air transmitter. And first of all, in rural areas, bandwidth is expensive. It's also really spotty. My mother lives in South River, Ontario, and going up there and trying to use the internet up there is like really painful because she's capped at 100 gigs per month. And, it doesn't take a long time to use that up. So it's like, so I think that rural internet is still really, there's a long way that we need to go in order to really fulfill the needs of people who live in rural areas with internet. And so that's a whole bigger question. The other reason for having an over-the-air transmitter too is because you can hear it in cars. And the third thing is there's a really important concept, and it's enshrined in legislation in Canada that the airwaves are public property. So as long as you have an over-the-air signal, you are the ones who are in control of that signal. When it comes to the internet, it's the big companies who basically control the stream of programming. And right now, it's like we still have net neutrality. If they ever get to the point where the big companies like Bell and like Rogers and everything can prioritize their own content, the rest of us could get squelched out. So that's why I think it's really, really important that we maintain a presence on the AM and FM band. And part of my work involves sometimes, through Cactus especially, going up to Ottawa and lobbying the CRTC for over-the-air television as well. And that's one of the reasons why, is because I think we don't want to lose that. So there you go. That's how I think podcasting is affecting radio right now. And I think, so what I can do right now is talk about getting a transmitter, just getting a licensed station on the air. So it is, it's a big job, but yet it's not impossible. And the CRTC is actually quite supportive of community radio and television. So there is a license class for community radio. It's a lot easier to get on the air with a community station than it is with a commercial station. But, and with television, that's true as well. There are hoops that you need to jump through, and it's not an instantaneous kind of thing because it requires a lot of planning. So in order to be on the air, then you have to have a license. And in order to apply for a license, then a couple of things are necessary. And the first thing is you have to prepare your documentation for the CRTC, which includes everything from who's on your board of directors to where your money is going to come from for the next 5 years, what you're playing. Basically, you have to put together a business plan for the CRTC. You also have to tell them what kinds of programming that you want to do. And there are some regulations around that, but I think they support community artists very, very well, because the emphasis is every broadcaster in Canada has to play a minimum of 35% Canadian content. And most stations that I know that are community stations far exceed that anyway, because there's so much good Canadian music out there. That's another reason for having a community radio station, is because commercial radio stations don't play local music. I've noticed a trend in the last 20, 30 years or so where it used to be possible for a musician to go down to their local radio station and say, here's my new single, will you play it? And you'd have a chance of getting it on the air. Now all the playlists are tightly controlled from Toronto, and it's just like, unless you have hit that certain echelon, then the airwaves are not open to you. So that's one of the things that's really, really great about community radio, is you can play local music. You can have a drama show. You can have a poetry show. You can have news shows. It's all determined by you. So getting together a license application is something which can be done by volunteers and has been done by many, many volunteers. So it takes a lot of organization, but the application form is on the website for the CRTC, and you can see it. There's another license class that they have, which is really kind of handy, and it's back in the 80s. We thought, well, communities were saying, well, we want to have a radio station on the air, but if it's all theoretical and nobody knows what it means, then, it's sort of like an imaginary radio station is really not sparking people's imagination. So a license classification was started, which is called a developmental station. And you can get a 4-watt station, which is basically only a little bigger than a baby monitor. So it's not a big station, but what's important about it is you can connect that with the internet now. You can broadcast your little 4 watts, which is enough to cover, it's probably enough to cover a small town, I would think, provided there aren't a lot of hills. But you can also extend it on the internet so that people could pick it up on the internet as well. You use that as a way to sort of figure out what you're doing, get your business plan together, get your financial plan together. And the important thing, too, in terms of funding, now the Community Radio Fund of Canada will provide funding for developmental stations as well. So it doesn't cost a lot to get a developmental station on the air, and that can get you access to a pool of funds to help you develop the programming on your station as well. So that's why I would say that the developmental station, even though it is very small, it's really quite useful. So there's another kind of station you can put on the air too. If you have a special music festival or whatever, there's this thing called the special event exemption, which basically means you can put a temporary radio station up to a wattage of 50 watts, which goes pretty far. I did one once with the Canadian Labour Congress in the middle of Toronto, and it got us almost all the way to the 401 from the convention center downtown. So that is actually something that if you do, once music festivals return and we can do live events again, that is something to consider. Now, the thing with that is, and the second part of it is, you not only have to apply for a license, this applies for television as well. So applying for a community television license also requires a license application to the CRTC. And you can do that. There's a license class for both over the air and also for a digital license as well to be carried on cable. So there's a few more variations in television. I'm not quite as familiar with television licensing as I am with radio licensing, but at Cactus, my executive director knows all that stuff inside out, backwards and forwards. So if you want any more information about that, I can find that for you. But the other part of it is the technical brief and the transmitter. So regardless of whether you are having a temporary radio station or a little 4-watt station or a full-blown community station that maybe might go an hour or two in every direction, then you need an engineer to be able to see who else is on the airwaves in your community. And not just on the radio airwaves, but also radio waves have the potential to interfere with airport signals, with radio systems in, in police stations and hospitals and things like that. So they're very, very careful to make sure that your transmitter isn't going to interfere with anything else. So that's why getting an engineer to do a frequency search is one of the first things. And you can't do that yourself. It's really not a DIY job. So sometimes you can find a retired engineer who does know how to do that. And if he's part of your community, he may do it for you for free. But otherwise, the cost to doing a frequency search last time that I checked was, if you're in a smaller community far away from a big city, then it's going to be cheaper because there's a lot more gaps in the air spaces than there are in Toronto. In Toronto, there are no frequencies left at all. So if you're kind of like, I'm looking here in Barrie, there are probably some little slivers of frequencies here and there where we could get a fairly decent signal. We're far enough away from Toronto, there may be some possibilities, but even then we're still pretty close. So we would have to hire an engineer. And for up here in Barrie, that would probably, last quote estimate I got was probably looking at $5,000 to try and figure out just where the frequencies are. If you're up in South River or Halliburton or, Red Lake, Ontario or something like that, then it's like the space is pretty much wide open. So it's not going to be so expensive because you don't have that many other signals to to contend with. So, but that's also what's necessary. You also need an engineer to help you find your transmitter. The application gets a little extensive. This is true of TV as well. You got to know where the transmitter is going to be located, how high it is, what kind of a transmitter is, how much power is going to be put out, and that kind of thing. So it does get complicated, but it's absolutely not impossible. And lots of small towns have done this. And in terms of funding, that's always what people want to know about as well. It's radio and TV across the country it's cobbled together on a number of sources. And some communities are better than others at selling advertising. And so there are some stations that are doing quite well supporting selling advertising. Other ones take donations. It's usually a whole combination of things. So donations, advertising, you'll be surprised by this, but a number of stations are supported with radio and TV bingo. So bingo is a big money maker for some of our TV stations in particular. And unusually during COVID, it's what they found is their bingo revenues have gone up. And there's one station in St. Andrews, New Brunswick, who said that they used to only sell cards in a couple of towns over. They would maybe sell 10 or 15 of them. And now it's like they're dropping off cards in the hundreds. So it's sort of like, it's kind of funny just how you put everything together. And grants are a possibility as well. The Ontario Trillium Foundation has been quite supportive of community radio. There aren't that many community TV stations, which is why I'm not talking about community TV a lot, is because it's like there are less of them. But if a good case is made that you need a station in your community, then it's like there are possibilities out there, just like there are possibilities out there to fund drama groups and to fund like local community kitchens and things like that. It's the same kind of fundraising strategy that you would have for any nonprofit group. Also the Community Radio Fund of Canada, like I said, if you get a 4-watt radio station up or something even higher, then the grants are they're pretty generous. It's like grants can be had from the radio fund right now anywhere up to $50,000, and it's a competitive process, but it's a lot of good has been done with that funding. And so I think that's pretty much the covering the ground in terms of your over-the-air signal. If you want to start a community media center online, all you need is a website and a plan for what you want to put on it. You'd want to get together with your group and say, okay, so what do we want to do? Do we want to offer podcasts? Do we want to offer videos? I just designed, or I was a co-designer of it's called commediaportal.ca, and that's the local journalism initiative national website where the stories produced by our journalists are being posted so that everyone can see them. So if you want to visit a whole bunch of different communities across the country, from Cape Breton Island to St. Andrews, New Brunswick, Quebec, if you speak French, number of stations in Ontario, including Manitoulin Island and Scriber, and several in BC and one in northern Saskatchewan. There's a lot of interesting stuff there. So if you wouldn't mind, Rachel, putting up Com Media Portal, COMMEDIAPORTAL.ca, then anyway, I'm really quite proud. Developing an online website with audio and video content on it is not, it can be difficult for sure, but we also posted all of the videos on YouTube as well, because we didn't want to get into having to pay a whole bunch of server costs for video content, which does add up. But it's like YouTube and SoundCloud is there, all kinds of places where you can store your content for free and share it out. So it's like it doesn't have to be expensive. So I guess in conclude, commediaportal.ca. That's what I've been working on for the last few months or so, and tearing my hair out about it quite a bit, because it's like, oh, designing websites is like, oh, that's a whole other kettle of fish, that's for sure. So I guess right now too, before I break for questions, I guess talking about how to bring together a like-minded group and work out just how you want your organization to work. So your mission statement is really, really important. And that's one of the things with the Barrie Community Media Group. We worked out our mission statement, which includes, I wish I could read it to you right now, but I didn't think to print it out. But it basically said, this is what our vision is, and this is what we want to do in our community. And it has to do with empowering people to speak their, to speak their truth, to also share cultural production of arts programs and that kind of thing. It also is about encouraging diversity. One thing that we built into our mandate too, because we don't believe that it has to be an either or kind of thing. You can involve professional broadcasters as well. Like, I'm a professional broadcaster too, and I've always found a home in community media. So we also built it into our mission statement that we would involve professional and non-professional broadcasters and media people, so that then media people who are professionals have a tremendous amount that they have to share. They have a lot of skills and a lot we can learn from. And also right now too, one really good resource is what's fueling the growth of community media in a lot of ways are retirees. They're people who have had distinguished careers in media. In radio, it's people who remember the good old days in radio and really, kind of mourn that radio has become what it is and that there's no access and it's commodified and people don't get access. So there are a lot of people who say, I really like radio the way it was. And so in a lot of ways, some community radio stations are similar to what commercial radio was in the 60s and 70s, when people did have access and you could go down to your local radio station and say, hi, can you do an interview with me about, the production that we're launching? So having a good mission statement is important to it. I would say start small with a group of people to start this, because, just to set it up and say, hey, we're starting a community media, center or a radio station or a TV station, then people, it's like they won't necessarily know what it is. So what I recommend is that you start with a small group of people to refine the vision and then start building programming out. And it can be very simple, like, let's all get together and do a radio drama. That's one thing I've done before that's an awful lot of fun. Just get an old script or have someone in the community who wants to write one, and bring people together and set up a few microphones and record it. And there you have something that you can put on your media portal, for example. Or if there's people in your community, you can say, well, having a community network of podcasts is a really good idea, because like here in Barrie, for example, there are people who are doing podcasts, but you know what they say about the internet? It's not really the information highway, it's the information swamp. because there's just so much out there. And how do you find it? So the thing is, if you have a portal where, like on Rabble, for example, we've always had independently produced podcasts where people can go and they can say, oh, I want to listen to this, I want to listen to this, I want to listen to this. And so the whole concept of a network where there's a collection on one place where people can go and they can sort of see so you can be an aggregator in your community as well. You don't all have to produce all of the material yourself that's on your portal. You can use the portal to bring in videos from other people in the community. And I think that one of the things that often is asked to us when we present our model for community media organizations and community media centers is like, well, yeah, but everybody has the tools now, they can do it themselves. But the thing is, what's different about having a community media group and center is it's sort of like, yeah, everybody can produce stuff in their own homes, but yet that doesn't make a community. You know, people, as we've seen through this whole COVID thing, as we've seen that our social networks are like, you know, I think hopefully we've been able to maintain them, but it's been really, really hard without that face-to-face kind of contact. So even if we are self-isolating, like with my journalists out there, then it's like they're just on the end of a Slack channel or a phone call or whatever, and they'll call me and they'll say, I really, really need to brainstorm with this with you. I'm really, you know, I've got this idea and I want to develop it. So to have people who are connected with each other in the community, even if you're not able to come together physically, then it's like it creates a synergy and an energy. And communities are not made by people sitting alone in their basements. Communities are made by people who are getting together and brainstorming and working with ideas and collaborating. And I think that is the best idea, that is the best reason for having a community media organization, is because what you're doing is you're providing a forum for people to exchange ideas with each other. And, you know, so I think that's probably the best idea. And also, too, new tools are available. And yes, there are some people out there who are producing some amazing stuff and they don't have any formal training, but that's not most of us. You know, most of us could really, really use some help just figuring out, okay, like, what's the best kind of equipment? And it's like my husband right now, you see Jane Hess is watching right now from the Brockville area. And so my husband has been a friend of the Hesses for quite a long time. And anyway, so it just reminded me, he's now doing his release of his second CD. He can't do it live right now because, you know, nobody can do live performances. So he's creating a video show, and so he's learned how to edit, he's learned how to shoot video himself. But the thing is, he's really, really valued that there are people he can go to, both myself and also other friends of ours too, so that we can say, gee, can you, I'm having, you know, I need some advice on this, you know. And so it really, really, it creates a synergy when people are able to work together. And I think that is the biggest value of having a community media association, even if you don't have a station on the air. Or even, I mean, a community portal is not that hard to set up. So I would say that that would be the place to start, is a community media portal. You might want to look at doing internet radio, or you can do like podcasts and maybe do some special Facebook Lives. Our location out in Ashcroft does two shows a week. And they do the Facebook Live thing, and they're getting like, you know, it's a town of like 2,400, and they're getting like half the people tuning in. So it's like you can do Facebook Live, there's a whole bunch of platforms that you can use, but the main thing is everybody working together and building your community through your work that you're doing in media. So I think that's about all I have right now on my list. I will double check it here. No, I think I pretty much have covered what I had planned to cover. So can I get a time check from somebody so I know just how much time? Or I can just keep on going until there are no more questions. How's that? Okay. So you can reach me. I am more than happy to answer emails. You can find me on LinkedIn holding my microphone. Okay, so what media Okay, would I recommend for anyone who wants to start a community platform, but due to physical distancing, I can't see the rest of the question. It says see more, but it's not letting me see more. Yeah, my phone isn't doing so. Anyway, if you could maybe, okay, but thank you for the person who says it's absolutely amazing expert chat. Okay, so, the question about the platform, or was the question about what kind of internet platform would you use? Because there's a lot, I have a lot of suggestions as far as video and audio equipment, but maybe what I'll do is just say that I think WordPress is the easiest platform to use. I'm not too crazy about their sort of like huge graphics that take up all the real estate on the screen and things like that. But I mean, if you do have a good WordPress designer, I think they can work very, very effectively with it. We're using, for the Com Media Portal, we're using Drupal, and I would never recommend Drupal to anyone unless they can pay a designer, because it's very, very powerful, but it's also a monster. So I would say WordPress is probably about the best place to start. And also in terms of video, hosting your videos on YouTube is the way to go so that you don't have to get any server costs. I distribute audio through SoundCloud. And okay, is it possible to do radio hosting from separate locations? Yeah, it is. I have never connected one of these platforms to go live before, but there are several platforms. First of all, you can do Zoom. And it's like the sound quality isn't always great, but you know, it's certainly, I use Zoom to do podcasts for Rabble, and I can hook up 4 to 5 people at a time, or even more than that. I've done panel discussions with, 12 or 13 or whatever. So Zoom, you can also record on the Zoom platform. I take a line out of my computer directly into my recorder, so I get a dedicated feed, but that gets a little complicated. You can also hook up, there's this thing called Zencaster as well, and I haven't used Zencaster, but it's really, really good quality, and it's like people can talk in real time to each other, and then the files are recorded in each separate location and sent to you to mush together on your editing platform. So it's like there are things like that. There are lots of tools, and in terms of once you get into editing and both video and audio editing, there's some good free programs. I always recommend that you start out with Audacity, Audacity, because it's totally free. And it's I did a workshop for station managers in the developing world, like way back in 2001. It was really exciting. I had station managers from Africa, from Latin America, from Bosnia, from Nepal. And anyway, and they told me Audacity is the program that they use in their small village radio stations. And so that's really, really easy to download and use. And so I would say the best thing to do, if you're capturing your audio with your cell phone, the file formats can be a little eccentric to deal with. So what I recommend is getting a separate audio recorder for, the Zoom product line, which is different from the Zoom video line. It's by a company called Samson. To complicate things more, it's Samson and not Samsung. So it's sort of like there's all kinds of companies that are confusing us these days. But if you get a recorder, from, you can get one for between $200 and $300, or sometimes even a little bit less, which record in MP3 or WAV files, which are the easiest way to you just take out your sound card and put it in your computer, just like you would if you were, downloading a photo. So anyway, in terms of video, there is a program called DaVinci Resolve, which is free, so you don't have to spend a whole bunch of money getting the Adobe suite and things like that. We use, at our place, we use Sony Movie Maker Studio, and it's like under $100, and it's really quite powerful. You can do a lot with it. That's what Ed, my husband, is using to edit together his CD release party. It's got a lot of functions. So it's like if you could spend a little bit of money then there are more options. But if you can't spend even any money at all, then there are a lot of possibilities just using the things that you already have. So anyway, so yes, so as far as radio hosting, there are lots of ways to do it, and I just don't have to, it's like I can't recommend anything, over another right now, except, Zoom is always the easiest right now because everybody's using Zoom, and also you can also hit record and you can download a copy from the internet. So, so that is, I think, what I have to say about that. Any other questions I haven't answered? Some of them may have disappeared up on the screen. Okay. Are we all talked out? Okay, well, I guess now, since I'm not seeing any more questions popping up on the screen, I will finish by saying you can find me on my own website for my own podcasting storytelling business is houseofsoundandstory.com. So anyway, and that's where you can find out more about my podcasting services and ideas about storytelling and things like that. My email is best one to reach me. I have many, but it is VL Fenner, Fenner, @gmail.com. And also you have all the links for the other organizations that I work with. And I am more than happy to, good, I have answered all of the questions from the above. I was kind of losing track there. But one of the things that has been really gratifying is to see the growth of community media from a tiny little closed circuit station next to the pub at University of Windsor that is now on the air, and with, like the handful of campus stations that have flourished. Well, I wouldn't say flourished, because campus and any kind of community radio station it's a constant challenge, like any nonprofit organization, to keep on the air. But the rewards, I tell you, the rewards are just so great. And I have seen people walk into the station very shy. It often happens with young women. They'll walk into the station and they'll say, well, I just want to help shelve CDs, or, whatever the equivalent is right now. And then after a couple of months at the station, and it has to do with confidence building. I really, really believe that the tools of media can be magic. What they can do is, the microphone is a magic wand, and it helps bring voices out of people hidden voices that they didn't even know exist. I've seen remarkable transformations, and that is, I think, what really, really keeps me in community radio the most, is just seeing what happens when people are allowed to express themselves and have a vehicle to express themselves, and when they see my voice counts, and so does yours. Happy to help you get a community media organization going in your community if that's what you'd like to do. Been great talking to you. Thank you.